The Pittsburgh Penguins have made a shocking move that could have major implications on their lineup, waiving a fan favorite, and this has Penguins fans absolutely fired up. We're going to break it down in this episode of Hattrick HQ, but before we do that, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 72% of you who watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel, so if you want to stay up to date with everything that's going on in the NHL, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and also subscribe to Penguins Digest, new channel here on in the network, and they're going to be covering everything Pittsburgh Penguins, so go subscribe to them. But Mark, without further ado, the Pittsburgh Penguins have placed Jesse Puljujarvi on waivers. I want your initial reaction to this because I know you like Jesse Puljujarvi, and this is a very shocking move for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I mean, we'll get into his stats and advanced analytics in a second, but to me, this is a shocking and even puzzling move for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Yeah, looking at this, I guess the pool is closed in Pittsburgh. You're looking at Puljujarvi. Yes, he has not lived up to the potential of being a fourth overall pick, but he still has so much potential in this league to buy in and jump into maybe a middle six if he consistently got minutes. We've seen Mike Sullivan kind of put him in a doghouse, not play him for 20 games this season, scratching him over guys like Matt Nietta that a lot of fans don't want in the lineup. Puljujarvi is only making $800,000 this year. It's the end of his contract, and I do think a team's going to claim him. I think he's going to fit comfortably in another team's system, and I think the Penguins are kind of shooting themselves in the foot, giving up on a guy. Yes, you need to move out some players to call up a defenseman with injuries to Letang, Pickering, and Marcus Pettersson. But looking at this, I just can't wrap my head around it.
No, it doesn't make sense. I mean, you can look at these advanced analytics from Chell Penguins as well. And this one blew my mind. I saw that they waived him, and I was like, wow, I really thought that he was playing well in Pittsburgh. I can't really understand this move, but maybe I'm missing something. So I went searching and seeing what fans were saying, and seeing something like this absolutely blows my mind, right? Like, he hasn't been seen, he hasn't seen the ice, since December 7th. He's been a healthy scratch for a long time. And before that, this is where he ranked amongst Penguins forwards. Obviously, time on ice, 12th, right? He wasn't playing a lot. He was kind of bounced around between lines. Assists per 60, 5th on the team. Points per 60, 5th on the team. Rush attempts, 2nd on the team. And expected goals for per 60, 5th on the team. And when you look at the team, guys like Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby, right? Even Brian Rust, who's put together a pretty good season this year. But if you're looking at that and he's 5th on this team, this is a guy to me who can help your team. So I can't understand why he's waived. This guy is a big physical presence. He has some speed to his game as well. He always really has. And then obviously he had surgery, that hip surgery, just a couple of years ago, and getting back up to speed. But very interesting move for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And this does have implications on the lineup going forward. Definitely, and it's, again, his advanced analytics are pretty good for a player that's gone through as much as he has, right? And fans are quite upset about what's going on, and they, have their own ideas about what the lineup should look like, and we'll get into that as well. But Mark, what do you think is the reasoning behind this? Obviously, waiving of Jesse Puljujarvi?
I mean, looking at the team, it seems like Mike Sullivan really likes to have these kind of grindy players in his bottom six. As much as Puljujarvi is trying to be one, I do think he has more offensive just upside, and it seems like he was wasting away and not playing to what Mike Sullivan wanted. I do think he should be in this lineup, but I don't think he fit the mold of it, with them needing help on the defensive end. As I said, Letang's out, Marcus Pettersson's out, Pickering's out. All three of these guys out. They do need to shift things around. They need to call up some players to fill out the back end on this defensive core. But looking at Puljujarvi, we've seen him dominating the AHL. Maybe they're fingers crossing that he can make it back to the AHL, get his footing back, and maybe join this team after a few just games or stints in the AHL. But I don't think he's going to clear waivers, and I think they could have went out and done something else other than waiving a guy like this.
Yeah, I think that they could have went out, maybe even make a trade, right? Because now you're waiving him, and I think, like you mentioned, he could end up going back down to the AHL and finding his footing, maybe make his way back to the NHL. But I think the most likely course of action here is he's going to be claimed by another team because he's put together a pretty good season, and he's the type of player that could make an impact on another team or a team that's trying to, figure their way out. Maybe the New York Rangers. I'm just going to throw it out there. Some teams that are struggling that could use maybe a bigger physical presence with some speed as well. So I think it's very interesting interesting. And, Pens fans right now are saying, if you look at the lineup on your screen right now, Drew O'Connor, maybe he's not long for this team. Maybe he could be used as a trade chip, right? Maybe he would, Puljujarvi could fit in on that third line, right? Matt Nieto as well. Like, a lot of Penguins fans want these players out. I don't know, like you mentioned, if Jesse Puljujarvi fits onto a fourth line role, especially with this team. It doesn't really make sense to me. But third line, certainly, right? So I think they could have made some room for him. He's putting together a pretty good season. So again, pretty shocking to me in terms of decisions. If you look at some of his stats, I thought this was crazy too. He actually has more points in his last 21 games than Matt Barzal of the New York Islanders, who are also struggling. So that's pretty crazy. So this is a guy that, yes, he's not blowing anyone out of the water. His stats don't really jump off the page at you this season, but he's put together a good enough season where I think that he could actually help the Pittsburgh Penguins. And now it's looking like he may not even be with the organization past tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this, and I'm going to kind of throw it back to you quickly. Do you think if a team claims him, it's going to be one of the teams, maybe like the Anaheim Ducks, just looking to get more young faces in their lineup? Or do you think a contender, maybe the Boston Bruins, want to continue to inject new players in their lineup as they try to turn their season around? We've seen the New York Rangers trying to do the same. The Vancouver Canucks are another team looking for a shakeup in any way possible to get back in the standings. Do you think this is going to be a contender after him, or do you think a team's going to take him on as more of a project rebuild?
I think that's a great point. And I think that it's going to be a contender because of the way his contract is structured as well. This is a guy who doesn't make a lot of money, so a contender can take on his contract. I think he can add a lot to the bottom six of your lineup. Maybe not a fourth line role, but I think in a third line role. And there's a lot of teams out there, especially contenders, that are looking to solidify the bottom of their lineup right now. Or maybe even he could fit in on a second line role. You never know, right? With certain contenders and the way that their lineup is built, the dynamic of a team. So I think he's more likely to go to a contender at this point. If he was making more money, then I could see a team like Anaheim, like you mentioned, maybe another bottom feeder team pick him up. Maybe even a Buffalo Sabres could be interested in a player like this, right? So I think it's very interesting. Again, I don't think he's long for this organization after this. I think they should have kept him, or if they didn't want to keep him, they wanted to move him, then move him in a trade. I think they're going to lose this player for nothing, and I think that's unfortunate. But pretty interesting stuff, Mark. And I don't know, Buffalo, could that be a team? They need some help, and this is a guy that I think could maybe slot into a team like that.
I mean, looking at Buffalo, I think it's a perfect fit. We've seen the Buffalo Sabres say, hey, we're not going to trade anyone. We want to get things rolling within this group. So why not take a swing on still a relatively young forward that was, like I said, a fourth overall pick that can produce and go into this lineup for only $800,000. If you don't want to make major changes, this is the perfect, and it's almost a silver platter for a lot of teams looking for a change to go out, acquire this guy. At the worst case, you pick him up, you run him for a couple weeks, and if it doesn't work out, he's back on waivers. Maybe he clears the second time going down. But I do think he's going to be claimed. I like what you said. It's going to be a contender, and maybe we see him be a big impact on another team.
Yeah, I think he's going to be not a centerpiece or anything like that for another team, but I think he could be a real complementary piece for a contender right now. And I think it's going to be a contender that is seriously going to consider picking him up, or a team that thinks they should be better than they are and are on the outside looking. And last thing we'll mention before we wrap up, and I'll throw it back to you, Mark, for your thoughts on this quickly, but Sidney Crosby becomes the all-time Penguins leader for assists, which is crazy, passing Mario Lemieux just the other night. With Crosby's injury history too, in around 2010, 2011, I think this is an amazing accomplishment. He's one of the best players of all time, and from the outside looking in as a fan, I mean, it's been a pleasure to watch a player like this. So any thoughts on the accomplishment? He got it the other night. I think this should be a bigger deal than it is, because passing a legend in the game like Mario Lemieux is amazing.
I mean, looking at Crosby, even if you're not a fan of the Pittsburgh Penguins, you respect what Crosby has done around this league. You want to watch Sidney Crosby. It's on my bucket list to watch Sidney Crosby live before he retires. This is the greatest player of our generation if you're in 20s or 30 years old. Looking at this guy, I still think he's the best two-way player. Yes, people are going to say Connor McDavid's better. But looking at Crosby, he's still the best two-way player in the NHL in his late 30s. The dominance from this guy, it's well-deserved. Do you think he's the best Penguin of all time?
That's tough. I think a lot of people would still say Mario Lemieux, and I think he still holds on to a couple records there in Pittsburgh, but I think it's close. And he's brought in, brought 3 cups to Pittsburgh, so he's definitely a legend there in Pittsburgh. But I don't know. I think we'll have to wait for a couple years after he retires to really think about it and make that decision. But for my money, I think it's very close. I think he definitely could be, and one of the best players of all time, honestly. And I think that's impressive in this day and age as well, just like Alexander Ovechkin, for example. But pretty crazy stuff for Sidney Crosby. But let us know in the comments what you think of Jesse Puljujarvi being waived by the Pittsburgh Penguins, and of course Sidney Crosby getting that crazy record. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything in the NHL.